Well, hello and welcome to Work Cookie, our weekly gathering of IOs, HRs, recruiters, and an actor or two as we try to make the world of work just a little bit better. And Dr. Emmy, you're going to be leading us today, and you've brought us a special guest as we talk about leading through chaotic change, which, welcome to the world we all live in. It's
Right.
all around us. So I'm really looking forward to getting some useful advice about how I navigate this storm. So let me turn it over to you to introduce our guest.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tom. I'm so glad to have you back this week. I am really excited to introduce Dr. MaryJo Burchard, who, before I introduce her directly, will just say she is a wonderful mentor of mine as well. And I've just gotten the pleasure to know her over this last year or so, and just a amazing, incredible insight that she can provide us today in the space that she is an expert in. So she has spent 2.5 decades helping leaders, teams, and organizations build clarity, cohesion, and alignment while facing change and uncertainty. Since moving to Virginia Beach in 2014, most of her work has been helping leaders and teams in local government, nonprofit, and corporate environments stay effective in tough times when people feel the most vulnerable. MaryJo's effectiveness at helping leaders and teams thrive while facing chaotic and unpredictable change was shaped by her own family's journey to help their Ukrainian born son, Victor, heal from trauma, learn trust, and grow into a thriving adult. Her dynamic blend of storytelling, humor, and audience interaction when she speaks enables participants to feel safe, grow in awareness, regain hope and focus, and rediscover what is within their power to do the most possible good right now. So, welcome, MaryJo. It's so great to have you on.
Thank you. It's a wonderful pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much. Well, I'll start. Just tell us anything about yourself that kind of your bio didn't give us insight to, and then we'll jump into some pretty direct questions.
Yeah. Well, I want to answer a question that I get a lot. And, being a practitioner of organizational leadership, I often am in communication with people who prefer to work with healthy organizations that are not in crisis. And I had somebody ask me recently, why do you gravitate to the dumpster fire? Why, why is it that why do you run to the crisis? And I said, well, obviously it's a lot of fun to be in a place where there isn't any crisis in the moment. But when you are bringing the best of yourself and insights and trying to get people to do stuff, and they're already amenable and things really go well, you never really know for sure if you were really effective or if you were bolstered by the health of the organization and by the competence of the people around you. Now, if you go into a dumpster fire, number one, you can't break it.
True.
You'll never hear is, what'd you do? Because it's already broken.
Right.
And number two, if what you bring can help people to see each other and remember who they are and think with clarity and find focus and get momentum when they had all but given up hope. If that light works in the deepest darkness, there's a saying, the light penetrates the darkness and the darkness has never mastered it. So if you can get it to work there, you know that it wasn't bolstered by some other co-non-morbidity. It wasn't just
Right.
that you walked into a good situation and so it made you look good. And so the side effect of that is you give people what works in the deepest, darkest, toughest day. You
I
have
love that.
something that will work on a good day too. So yeah, it
That's
requires a
beautiful.
lot more internal resilience to gravitate to the dumpster fire. But like I said, if you can help people fix what's broken, they're going to be a lot more amenable to listen when they don't have any buffers or other ways to squirm around. They have to deal with it right now if they're going to survive. So yeah, that's I think the only
Yeah.
thing that the why um,
Right.
is what I wanted to share. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's important. And I love that. And, honestly, the question of, about not being able to break it, or the statement about not being able to break it because it's already broken, I think is just a really powerful reflection of some of the things that I'm sure we're going to be talking about today. So thank you for sharing the why, because I think,
No, I will say I do enjoy going to healthy organizations. I don't snub them, but I'm also not afraid of going into the dark places on the tough day. So yeah. You can go ahead and suck it to me.
no, that's
Go
beautiful.
ahead.
I'll start with that kind of area, right? Well, so when chaos hits, leadership can't be scripted, right? These are situations sometimes that are unexpected. COVID is something we talked about before we started even the recording of that sort of an area that's not a scripted response. So what does that mean in practice, and how can leaders prepare themselves before that chaos begins?
So, such a good and important distinction between planning and preparation. Planning is absolutely necessary. I see LindaAnn is laughing. Planning is setting goals and having measurables to reach a fixed destination. And you are silly if you think that you shouldn't have plans because things won't go as scripted. A responsible person will still have plans. They'll still have a desired destination, not a wish list, but set goals and measurables to reach a fixed destination. But preparation is awareness of the risks, needs, and resources necessary to stay afloat and thrive.
Yeah.
Think about the difference between emergency preparedness and leading an expedition to climb a mountain. Okay, so you may have some overlap there. You could definitely, people that have climbed the Himalayas know that emergencies do occur along the way. But so you cannot conflate the plan and the timeline and the measurables and how to know whether or not you're making progress to get up the mountain with having emergency preparedness, knowing what needs might come up, what contingencies that you need to have, who has what resources, and how will you survive the storm or somebody falling through the crack or whatever it is. So these two can overlap, but they're not the same. So that's the difference between planning and preparation. And sadly, in leadership circles, the focus for so long has been on the planning only.
Right.
And kudos to many organizations that are now trying to humanize the planning. But there's still, you can tell by the language that's used that the focus is on planning rather than on preparation, and they should not be mutually exclusive. So you have language that sounds like speed of adoption, which is a marketing model, and that says a lot, right? We're treating change like a sales pitch, effective sales. Okay, so you have speed of adoption language. You have language of support versus resistance, and how good are you at change? In one of my books, I open it by saying, I can't be good at all change, and I shouldn't be. When I die, I hope my husband and son cry. I hope they cry real hard. They better cry real hard. And I hope they don't just look at each other and say, pivot, We should not be good at all change because some things are supposed to hurt when we lose them or when they change. So the language is a good indicator that the focus has been too hyper-focused on the planning side and not enough on the preparedness side. So when language, you'll never get buy-in for a hurricane, for example, right? I live in Hurricane Alley, and we are just getting into hurricane season. I used to, Tom, I know you work for a municipality. I used to work for the municipal government of Virginia Beach. And I will tell you that they don't get to vote on which hurricanes come here, how quickly they come, how long they stay, or which neighborhoods are going to be. Could you just go to this neighborhood? We've got all the sandbags that we need over there. We don't get to vote on those things. So what do? We have readiness conversations. And so that's, I know that's going to be, I don't want to take away this from the next question, but that's the difference. You can tell by the language whether or not people are hyper-focused on reliance on a good script rather than the preparedness focus of knowing the risks, needs, and resources necessary to stay afloat and to thrive.
I love that, and I love the example of the hurricane. We're down here in the Gulf Coast, the forgotten coast. We often hear East Coast, West Coast, right? We're the
Sure.
Gulf Coast that often gets those hurricanes down here, and some pretty intense ones. And that, I think it's such an important distinction on the preparedness side, because every year that we do have one, we learn something about being more prepared and more ready the next time around. We just got a generator. So it's,
That's great. That's wonderful.
Yeah, just, enough years of learning without it. So I'd like to kind of pivot a little bit to the leadership model that you have, the DUEL leadership model, and that how that has that emphasis on the readiness versus this concept of buy-in that we often hear about with change. How do you define the difference between the two? I think you kind of already touched on that a bit, and the distinction between that in the time of disruption, like really what that model helps to highlight and how it helps to prepare.
Yeah, I love that. So readiness is simply being prepared mentally or physically for some experience or action that has to happen. It can also be being prepared for immediate use. So that's readiness. And so that's very different from buy-in, which is trying to convince somebody that something that's going to happen to them is good. Right? And so the DUEL model essentially assumes that people are responding to change, any given change, a specific change, based on how it's affecting them right now. Okay, so I may know that a change is absolutely necessary. I may know that ultimately it will be to my benefit or to the benefit of the organization or my community or whatever. But right now, I need something, I hurt, I whatever. And so the DUEL model basically is saying, all right, if the change is hitting me in a way that impacts my needs, threatens my needs, or keeps me from being able to meet it innately, then I'm going to pause to resolve that challenge. If it's either meeting a need or at least not threatening a need, then I can pounce on it and immediately embrace it, adopt it, integrate it, implement whatever I need to do in order to say, welcome, change experience. So that is happening on a spectrum. It's not either or, and it's not monolithic. So it's happening in multiple layers. The DUEL model addresses those 4 layers. Details. What details do I need right now in order to have clarity to know what I need to do right now? Next is the unknowns. What risks related to the unknowns are threatening my needs that I need to mitigate those risks in order to know that I can move forward. E is the emotions. So you can mitigate your risks, you can have the clarity that you need, but in the moment it can just hurt. It can just hurt. You could be grieving. Grieving comes in cycles. So you can resolve that pain, that anxiety, that frustration or whatever, but in the moment it's just hard. And you may need some space just to process that emotion. And then L, this is the one that people talk about the least, is legacy. It's that sense of whatever has created equilibrium in your life, that you have markers, environmental and even internal markers, that you look at that and you can gauge how you're doing based on your sense of contribution, your sense of orientation, your sense of meaning and purpose. And you have these markers in your life that are your representatives of those things. And when a change disrupts or removes them, then your sense of self, your sense of purpose, your sense of value, your sense of direction can be threatened. It can be incredibly disorienting. I've had it described as, I feel like my fingerprints have been removed. I've heard it described as, I don't even recognize this organization anymore. I've heard it described as, I don't know how to fit. I don't know what I bring to the table. I don't know why I'm still here. those are legacy questions. So you can do buy-in all you want. You can have all the details that you need. You can give people a way to mitigate risks. You can be a safe place to emote. But if they don't know how to be who they are in this situation, they will do one of two things. They will turn off the part of them that hurts, or they will leave. So they're going to leave one way or the other, right? If they can't bring that, there's no language for it. There's no way to talk about it. There's no way to resolve it because they don't want to be not buying in. They don't want to be a lagger. They don't want to be a not team player. They don't want to be labeled as bad at change. And so what's left? Turn it off. Turn it off if you're going to stay. Turn it off if you need a paycheck, you know? And so I believe that change fatigue is not about the change. It's not about too much change until you get fatigue. It's about having to turn off the place that hurts so much that there's just a sliver of you left. You're coming to work, you're doing your tasks, you're breathing in and out until you can go home. And that's exhausting. That's where the fatigue comes from. So
yeah, I think I have experienced that a time or two in my life too. And so I love that you have some language around that, the legacy and the link from legacy to some of these questions that have gone on in my head in situations where I didn't even really feel comfortable sharing those questions out loud, right? It's, the big one to me that you mentioned there is, why am I still here, right? Why am I still here?
right.
In the midst of all of these things going on, why am I still here? And so I love that you have some language around that and really just giving honor to that human part of us in the workplace that does feel fingerprints on things that we've built and designed and created, especially in cases where you're kind of the original person in that, where you're the designer from the onset, right? So, I kind of want to talk about that a little bit more, the buy-in concept, right? So what are some signs that a team is stuck in buy-in mode versus readiness mode? Because a lot of the focus is getting people on board, I think.
Sure. I think the biggest one is no shared language is available to discuss the real challenges and needs that are required in order to implement whatever the thing is. Somebody could be asking all these questions so that they can get clarity, so that they can know what to do. But because they're asking questions, they're labeled as a troublemaker or as somebody who's not good at change. When really they're saying, to quote Jerry Maguire, "Help me, help you, help me, help you." And so no language. I think that ProSci, for example, is the gold standard of change management on the linear side, on the planning side, but they use the term resistance, and they talk about it in terms of a physics statement, and they say not all resistance is bad. And I agree with that. But I also think that words have innate meanings. They have subliminal implications in a culture. And so if you're using the term, where's the resistance coming from? Even if you tell people that's not bad, it still feels like an accusation. It still feels like you're doing something to push back, when really it's not resistance, it's pause. If you don't have a way to talk about what you need in order to move forward, and the only word is resistance, you're going to have a harder time being honest about that. And so here are the other things: framing conversations like sales pitches, and trying to adapt your sales pitch to the team because of what's important to the team. If all you're doing is having a sales pitch conversation, you're still subliminally, even if it's unintentionally, telling them if they have a concern, if they have a need, there are only support and resistance. And then framing concerns as resistance and lack of support, or measuring your success exclusively in terms of staying on your timeline and speed of adoption. Timelines might not be movable. You might not have a choice. But again, you can't conflate those two. And so if you're stuck in buy-in mode rather than readiness mode, then you have no space for people to say, this hurts. I'm in, but this hurts. I just need some space. Please, can you give me an hour to process, or I'm going to be doing this, but I don't want to talk about it right now because it just hurts. You know, if you don't have a way to frame the human reality that when things change, they can either benefit you and you can be excited about it, or they can hurt you and you can be struggling. And both of those things, recognizing that both of those things are true, is for both people a sign that they're wired right. You know, if I put my hand on a burner and I leave it there, because the person who also put their hand on a burner, they're leaving their hand there because it's not on. You know, and I leave my hand on there until I smell smoke or bacon, you know, or whatever. I'm not better at change. I'm not better at change because I look like the person who has their hand still on the burner, and it's not hurting them. If we allow for the reality that the same change is not the same experience for two people right next to each other, we don't feel the compulsion that we have to convince the other person that they need, that if they're not a cold heart, that they're going to, if they cry, then they're bad at change, or if they're excited about it, they're a cold-hearted snake. You know,
Right.
we leave room for the reality that because of where we are, change can be impacting all of us differently, and we can all be telling the truth. And we can have different conversations if we're asking what we need, rather than are we in support.
Right. I love that. And, you know, even thinking about the word resistance, there is a negative connotation to it for people, right? Maybe not everyone, but at least certainly for me, and I'll speak for myself. Um, I hear that word, and there are many negative connotations that come along with the concept of resistance. And so it's
Sure.
interesting to have different language around that, because many of the changes that we've experienced organizationally in the last few years ourselves have involved things like a reduction in workforce. And those things are painful to deal with, whether it is the person leaving or the person that is still staying behind, right? So for both of those, there's experience that can be negative around that. So really, really interesting to have some actual dialogue around that, and really kind of not eliminating the concept of buy-in for linear change and planned change,
100%.
you know, right? But having the additional language for change that maybe is not so linear. So looks like we've got some hands up here. So we'll go ahead and go over to you, Nick.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear, you know, you almost kind of discussing the vantage points of change. When you're in charge of the strategy, you know, you've got to get buy-in, and you start to speak like a marketer. You start to use those terms because those are effective in other areas of the business. But do they have the same effect when you're dealing with your team and all of that? And so I think the idea of common language is the leader's responsibility to say, this is the script we're using. When I say this, I mean this. And you may have to go back to feeling like you're teaching a kindergarten class to some degree. But I think that to get buy-in, first, you have to have understanding. So if in your planning stage you've had, you know, why are we doing this? What is the impact? And what is the overall goal? And if you can be somewhat transparent with your team, they are going to be more willing participants. And I think that idea of resistance versus buy-in, it's the wrong language for relationship.
100%. 100%. And adding to that, okay, so you're bringing something, and maybe it's not only good ultimately, but it's absolutely necessary if your organization's going to survive, right? So if you know, you don't convince somebody about how comfortable a parachute is before they jump out of an airplane, they got to have it on or they're going to die because everybody's vacating the premises, right? So, but I think part of it is too, if we imagine that an organization is also an organism, and that organism has nerve endings at the end of, and every team is feeling the impact of whatever is coming in a different way. And if we can say, all right, here is exactly what you said, Nick. Here's what's coming. Here are the benefits that we can see. Here's the timeline. This is where there's leeway. This is where there isn't leeway. This is why it's necessary. Now, here's the reframe. What do you need in order to implement? Starting there instead of buy-in questions. What do you need in order to implement? Where do you see, and giving people, rather than people who raise their hands and say, I object, because they don't have to frame it that way. You can say, what do you need? And then they can say, well, what about this risk? Okay, yes, that's a measurable risk. And you can then have conversations that say, okay, let's mitigate that risk. Or we've already mitigated that risk. I didn't know you needed that. Here it is. Or, oh, we have all the Legos to build a solution. Who's on board? Or C, I can see why that would be a concern for you. It's a concern for me too. We don't have the ability to address that. But let's talk about why that hurts. Let's talk about, get it out there. It's not going anywhere either. It's going to fester if you don't let them talk about it. But once they've talked about it, and you can say, now, have we done everything that we can do about this? We know that it's later on our calendar, if that can change. But if we've done everything that we can for now, and this has to happen, I want to invite you guys to conserve your energy for that tension go. Just let it go. And if you explain to them why, because you need all the energy that you can have for the things that you can do, so that you can focus on what you're not helpless about. Now you've talked about it, but you haven't framed it in a way that it's about support or resistance. It's about real concerns and real pain, and helping each other adapt the best, doing the most possible good and the least possible damage in a recognizably unideal situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that to kind of piggyback on that a little bit, we talk about chaotic change. That's something that is outside of your control. So any change strategy has to be like, are we doing this to ourselves? Is this the market doing this to us? Do we have to do it now? Do we have to do it later? What's the impetus for change? And then again, being able to be transparent with the team of, oh, well, we don't have a choice. This train is leaving. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to pack your bag, but we're getting on and we're going. Or,
right.
Hey, we've got 6 months to plan for this. Like, let's come and really work together. Because, it's obviously going to be different based on the situations that you find yourself in.
Totally agree. Really insightful. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you very much, Nick. Christine, let's go to you.
Hi, everyone. Good to see everyone again. Thank you, Dr. Burchard, for bringing this to us. I do want to state a couple of things. You talked about fatigue, and then we talked about resistance, and I just want to kind of touch on those. I'm also a ProSci certified change practitioner, and I have been practicing in the change world for over 15 years. And there are a couple of things. I think fatigue is also in relation to kind of ancillary things that are happening to people. So I have kind of coined the term compounded change. And when we're in organizations that have multiple layers of transformation occurring, that is a level of compounded change just in your workplace alone. Not to mention personal change that people might be going through, i.e. marriage, divorce, dealing with ailing parents, dealing with their own medical needs, raising children. We have been deemed the burnt out generation because we're both raising children and taking care of ailing parents. These are all parts of compounded change that make us already have that change fatigue almost built in. So when we talk about organizational transformation and we talk about being clear on the message, being clear on the why, that is where we address fatigue from an organizational perspective. We're not here to bring you more change stress. We are here to give you change clarity. And I think that's really important. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about was the change resistance that we were talking about. So for me, when you think about resistance is actually, when I think about it from a workout perspective, resistance makes us stronger. And so in a lot of ways, I feel like resistance and organizational change can make the change process stronger because it is almost designed to kind of show where there might be holes in our change strategy. And it gives us the opportunity to say, you know what, we need to plug these holes and make our strategy and our process stronger, i.e., making our change leaders, our change network stronger to implement and champion the change.
I love so much of what you just said. I want to touch on both of those. First of all, the compounded change. I love that you talked about how complex every human being nobody comes in as a blank slate, right? If we're integrated human beings, which I hope that we are, then everything is touching. Everything, we bring in all of that with us. And the challenge is, one of the things that I like to do with people when they have the bandwidth to do it is a change impact timeline that says not, and then this happened, and then this happened, but the deltas. Like, then I lost this, and then this moved, and then, and they overlap, and they're all happening at once. And unless this has been resolved, it's still part of and so it's, like you said, it's all layering. It's a big soup. And the challenge is, it's a benefit how we're wired, that when we're in crisis, we tunnel, right? So that all we see in the moment is the one thing that we have to resolve. And that on one side is really good. But on the other side, to your brilliant point, is that we can be saying, I've been through worse. Why is it so hard this time? I can't get, what's wrong with me? And we get up in our heads and we're so cruel and brutal to ourselves, not really realizing that, yes, you're tunneling, that's all you can see, but you've never also been doing that while you have sick parents and while you're navigating whatever it is in your personal life stage, moving, marriage, divorce, all these other things, a child in crisis, all these different things that you bring with you into that moment that can also create noise. And I think one of the things that we can also recognize in the workplace is that self-regulation skills, and bringing ourselves into a place of stability, mental stability. People can't do anything constructively until they can think clearly. And so when we're doing performance management, when we're trying to guide a difficult change, when we're trying to do anything, and we don't recognize that some people are coming into the workplace already outside of their okay zone. They're already amped up. They're already in fight or flight, or they're already shut down. They don't have the capacity to have those conversations constructively until they are in a space where so there may be a need to be able to say, do you need 5 minutes to collect yourself? Maybe even making it destigmatized and even modeling for people simple breathing exercises, or simple, here's what I say to myself, or different ways to help people. Sometimes people just have never learned how to self-regulate. So compounded change, 100%. But that is also in the context of, we can only see the one in front of us. And so we don't understand why it's so hard in the moment, because we're only talking about this, but we're not just carrying this, we're carrying all the other stuff with us at the same time. But then also resistance. I totally agree. Resistance can make us stronger. I feel like there needs to be two sets of vocabulary, though, when we're talking amongst leaders, and making sure that the leaders understand that, yes, resistance can make us stronger. And also the way that you described resistance, not everybody takes it that way. And so if we're using I think that there's an inside voice and an outside message. And so the average person doesn't get that resistance is a good thing. They get resistance is that you don't have buy-in, and that you're not being good at change, and that you're not being a team player, and that you're not on the bus, or, all these different things. And so they're not going to get that. And so you're going to have energy that you could spend trying to explain the acknowledged good things about resistance to the average person. I think if you just change words and give them a language to talk about their needs, and you can know that it's a resistance. And because there are always going to be leaders who are bent. It could be 1%, it could be 10%, it can be a third. I think it's usually about half or more, sadly. who are about their power, and they're about not making other people making them look bad. It's not the change practitioner who has that problem. It's the manager on the front lines. And that's the experience of the team, right? As the manager. And so that person takes a word like resistance, and they're using it to frame, don't make me look bad. Stop making this hard for me. I have a timeline. And that's a misuse of the word, acknowledged. But if we can just find words that do work without having to get people who are bent already on having a power trip, now the responsibility, the onus is on the manager to say, what do you need? And people are allowed to pause, they're allowed to pounce, but today, it's not about buying, it's not about getting everybody to pounce, it's about everybody saying, what do you need today? That takes away that buffer from the leader who's just looking for implementation timelines and being proud of everybody so-called being on the bus. And I know that that's a perversion that's not the intent of, like I said, ProSci is gold standard. But it's what happens on the front lines. It's the experience of many people on those teams because of leaders who are not leading, they're trying to control and script. And so while you're navigating a change, that's not going to be when they're going to change the way that they are. And so reframing it can help. Those don't have to compete with each other. I think that the resistance terminology needs to stay with the people on the strategic side so that you can give people on the front lines words that make them unafraid to tell the truth about their experience.
Thank you very much, Matt. And LindaAnn, we'll come to you next. But before we do, I just want to jump in and ask you, because I think we're sort of going down this path, and it's about the communication skills and communicating that leaders need to have. I'm old enough, I've gone through several changes in organizations, and it usually starts with, there's change coming, and we're going to tell you about it in 2 weeks. And now you've created a void. Nature abhors a void. I'm a very creative person. I can create a whole horror film about what's about to happen.
100%.
And then 2 weeks goes by, we have that meeting, and I'm sitting there going, you couldn't have told me that 2 weeks ago. So that element of like, it's sacred knowledge, and I know and you don't know. Mm-hmm. How do we avoid that? Or can we get leadership? Do they have those communication skills?
Right. If I could say the number one challenge that I see, and ProSci talks about this too, that oftentimes they're invited way too late in the game, when things have already blown up, and now there's not reasonable time to do, a humane timeline using the ADKAR model. The number one problem is this: people conflate giving people a voice with giving people a vote, because that's the only way, especially in societies where we get to vote on lots of things. That's what they think that it is. Part of the problem is that we don't have a language, right? If I frame the conversation, I'm going to tell you what's happening, and I need you to know that it has to happen. It's going to happen in this timeline. That's not negotiable. But how can here's where I appreciate the value of all the nerve endings when I ask, I want you to tell me what you need right now in order to do the most possible good and the least possible harm. We're going to try and make this experience as humane as possible. That's a different conversation from, how do I get you on board?
Right.
Does that make sense? And
yes, it does.
So I think that that's part of the problem, is because people only have language for voice equals vote. What I actually, this is a real story. I was talking to a leader. They had a mandated change that had to come. They had about 2 months advance notice, which still was barely enough time. They knew that everybody, this organization had a culture of being able to vote, wait till we all are on board and wait till we're all, and it wasn't one of those changes. And so instead of telling them when they found out, they waited until the absolute minimum time that was needed, like for everybody to just hold your breath and do all the things, which was about 2 weeks before it had to happen. And they said, they said, we figured we would just rip off the Band-Aid and let it bleed. And I said, and how did that go? And they said, well, it's been 2 years and we're still bleeding. And because here's what people say, you knew and you didn't tell me. I could have helped. I have all this insight. I knew how this was going to impact XYZ. I would have brought that to the table. I wanted to communicate. And so now the irony is the leaders didn't trust the discussion of because they knew that they couldn't have a vote. So they, by default, betrayed the trust that they did have from the people, because now they're like, well, now we know that they won't even tell us. They betrayed. They don't believe that I could handle the truth. And so it added a trust rift when they needed the trust of the people. It added a trust gap to an already difficult situation. So I think that's the problem, is a vote isn't a voice. You have to give parameters and provide a language so that people have a way to talk about what they need while making it clear that this is going to happen. This has to happen. We can't not let this happen. And then you can build readiness before, during, and after. Anybody who's had a driver's license picture knows that sometimes things happen before we're ready. Right? But you can still build readiness. If readiness is being prepared mentally or physical for an experience or an action, then even after the thing happens, you can go back and get readiness for the current impact of that thing. So you can start as early as you can start in the middle, you can start at the end to having readiness conversations, because it's all about what do you need and what can we do.
Well, true story, previous job. I was part of a group that got a 4:30 Friday email about a meeting 9 o'clock Monday morning. Was not a good weekend. LindaAnn, over to you.
Well, I think that what you just said, Dr. Burchard, is a good transition into what my question really is, when you talk about going into the dumpster fire, they didn't get to the dumpster fire like overnight, right? That happened over time. And so when you're talking about layering change on top of an organization who doesn't have the right foundational systems and structures and communications all in place, how do you work to prevent it from being lipstick on a pig, when people are going through, I've seen this movie, rolling the eyes, and I've seen this movie before, and we're going to go through this exercise, and then 6 months later, everything will go back to quote normal. When you don't have the right foundations in place for the organization to accommodate that change in a healthy, integrated way.
Oh, man, you just nailed exactly why a lot of people don't even go to the dumpster fire in the first place, right? Because it's all a mess. It's all a mess, right? It's not just usually it's not a fire in the corner of the dumpster. It's the whole thing is on fire. And I was just talking to a leader recently who had accepted a position it was an internal promotion. And when she got to see how the sausage was made, she was like, it's all a mess. It's all on fire. And the challenge for people who want to create order is that you hover over that and you start pulling on the rope to try and figure out where the end is so that you can start building. And the more that you pull, the more you see that it's all in chaos. And this is where I said, I'll tell you exactly where to start. And she said, where? And I said, right here. Somewhere. Start somewhere. And on that one thing, create clarity, invite transparency and honest engagement that is committed to be constructive. And because everything is connected, once you get that clarity and you're setting up new muscle memory for people that, insofar as it is up to us, what we can do, you're just only talking about what you can do, you're helping them to take ownership of what they can. Then from there, you'll see what's the most obvious thing that needs to be done next. And you just start. And it's hovering over the, without form and void, and you're hovering over the darkness. And you have to start somewhere. call the light from the darkness, and then you let the dry land appear. You do one thing at a time, and it doesn't really, at that point, it doesn't matter where you start. You have to start somewhere with the people in the room that are willing to engage, and you say, all right, it's all a mess. Let's all admit it's all a mess. So we're just going to start right here, and let's agree, because the most important infrastructure to build is an infrastructure of trust and a commitment to being constructive. So if you can get some people, a handful of people who are willing to tell the truth about what they see and bring their whole set of resources and networks and insights to the table, clean up that one thing, and then one thing at a time. And it's not a quick fix. And the challenge is sometimes as you do that, you realize, in the words of what was her name on Clueless, this is so not fixable. You get to the point where you realize this isn't this. We're going to do the best that we can, but we're just going to acknowledge this is. We're going to go down. Either we're going to go down with the ship, or let's do the best that we can. For example, if you're talking about readiness, and you know that you have to let 800 people go, or 8 people go, or 2 people go, or 1 person go, you can still have a readiness conversation with that person. What details do you need to know in order to have clarity for what you're going to do next? What are the risks? You can still have those conversations with people because they're human beings and they still need clarity. And so sometimes the deeper you dig, the more you realize that you can't fix it. But then at least you can know that you did due diligence, And so when everything is broken, you can pick the place that feels, you feel you have the most people that have buy-in, not buy-in, well, okay, buy-in, but that they're committed. There's a mutual commitment and a dedication to be honest, to stay constructive, and to do the most possible good in that and create clarity, so that at least you know that section isn't what's broken, and then you go to the next thing. And yeah, that's the best that you can do. Sometimes it won't work either, and then you have to wait till the dumpster melts. I mean, you help get out as much as you can, before you go.
I think too, when you're talking about those elements, when you're talking about change for individuals, and you're looking for people to embrace a mindset, a new mindset, right, or just develop that trust, and it's not changing a light bulb. This takes time. This will be a 3-year process.
If you're lucky.
And you have to celebrate your progress, not waiting for the end result.
So good. And in a world where everything is with my 5-step program, before and after, and, photoshopping the results, and, only focusing on best case scenarios, you'll look at how hard it is, and you'll think there's something wrong because it's not an immediate fix. And I would be wary of anybody who says, follow this formula and it'll magically work. It's anything worth doing it's going to be hard. You have to pick your hard. It's hard to stay in there and stay focused and stay clear and help people who've never had anyone help them to learn how to have wage clarity and wage constructive conversations, and look at somebody else and say, we are miles apart, but you're worth the work. We're gonna work together, even though we have this tension. It's so hard to do that, but it's also hard to look back and have 6 months in one place and 2 years in another, or 20 years in one place, and there's a sliver of your identity left. You don't even know who you are anymore. So you have to pick your hard. And so if you can model for people, what people really want more than anything else is to know that they matter and that what they do matters. And so even in the middle of a dumpster fire, if you can help people to see that you see them and that you're calling them to discipline themselves, and that you are modeling self-discipline to get them to a higher place of, well, we see each other, we're in this together. There's hope in that. That's bigger than That's bigger than the organization. It's bigger than, even if neither of you stay in that organization, they'll remember that you helped them to gain clarity as a human being and to know how to be constructive in your conversations. They'll remember that. And so if we can leverage the crisis to build those, to have an excuse to build those things and to model those things in people, it will transcend the outcome of any given organizational challenge. People go their whole lives not being seen.
Which is terrible. And this work is a lot of work. Thank you for that, Natasha. Let's go to you.
I'm here. I was trying to unmute from my cell phone. Hi, everyone. Long time no speak. So glad to be here. I'm sorry I was a little bit late, but this is a great conversation. I wanted to kind of jump back in on something you mentioned, Dr. MaryJo, when you were talking about, the point of focus. Start with the people who are already committed to the work and already bought into the work. I would also like to say, in my experience, those who are midway, because there's still a 50% opportunity to get their buy-in, which increases your percentage of being able to effectively carry out the work, rather than focusing on the small percentage of those that are against the work or have not bought in fully. But I think it was Christine who mentioned earlier talking about organizational transformation, and a point that was raised on various occasions from the time that I jumped on this call, referencing the role of middle managers or managers. And oftentimes, while the work is called organization transformation, many of these leaders are not transformative leaders, meaning that while they are able to communicate the changes that need to be affected, they are not able to hone in or find the transformational language that will either inspire or encourage stakeholders to really show up and effectively carry out the work. And referencing to that point, when we talked about the self-regulation, oftentimes we tend to focus on the individual contributor or the employees, when in reality, we have a lot of leaders that are not self-regulated. And that lack of self-regulation tends to appear most when they are met with resistance, when they are met with what they consider to be resistance, versus an employee either standing up for self-advocacy or being able to constructively communicate. As someone who's in the weeds of doing this work, this is my recommendation. So rather than seeing the collaborative nature or input or concern of their team members, they rather see it as being combative or seeing it as, resistance, which in turn communicates to this employee that you are not trusted, you are not valued, you are just a number here to do the work, and your thought, whatever it is that you bring in, is not constructive or collaborative to us. And oftentimes that does impact the ability for said transformational work. And oftentimes and sometimes the changes that are required from above are not always constructive. They're not always transformational. They're not always to the benefit of the people carrying out the work. But it is within the leader's ability to be able to champion their team to the finish line. And I say this from a standpoint of having a discussion with an employment attorney not too long ago, who was going to meet with a group of middle managers and leaders, really to talk to them about how to get buy-in and to be more positive, because a lot of these managers were ragging were ragging out or speaking ill of upper management, or speaking ill of the decisions that they had to carry out, or in other instances, just really honing down on the employees, and employees lack motivation and trust, etc. And literally was telling me, how do I get that buy-in from my managers? And I think on most of the sessions that I have been a part of, when we have these conversations, it is again going back to who we promote, who we hire of managers, and being able to make the clear distinction between one's ability to effectively manage a product versus one's ability to effectively manage people, and what it takes to manage, to support, direct, and in sometimes self-regulate in order to hear, listen, and carry out, what they hear from their team members.
Yeah. Yeah. Going back to what you said about, I think part of it is I am advocating for a completely different way to measure. And I hear you, what you're saying, starting with people. When I say start with the people who are most committed to being constructive, I'm not talking about people who have buy-in by the traditional definition. I'm saying whatever their opinion about what's happening right now, they're willing to tell the truth and frame it in terms of what they need and what their concerns are. And know that the timeline or the ultimate outcome may not be up for discussion, but so it's a reframe of what the conversation is, and they're willing to stay constructive and not get personal, not attack, not turn it into a discussion about vote when that's not on the table. And so that's very different from, in fact, Lincoln used to call, he had what he called a murder board, which sounds very violent, but it wasn't. It was basically, he would get all the people in the room whose integrity he trusted beyond measure. And many of them had very vastly different opinions and perspectives from him. So he would bring an idea to them, and if they could kill it, if they could pour holes in it and it wouldn't survive, then it wouldn't make it out of the room. But those were all people who were committed to being constructive. Okay, so then they knew if the idea made it out of the room, it could survive any fire outside of that room because it had already been pre-vetted. That's what I'm talking about in terms of reframing. And so you're right. This is why I suggest that the resistance terminology be restricted to internal leadership only, executive level discussions, because you do not have the energy to reframe for the power mongering, narcissistic leader. That resistance is not about getting people to not make you look bad. And telling the truth about what they need is not a challenge to their authority. And so you have to give them different words that expose. If the goal is no longer to make them pounce, because the timelines are the timelines and the outcome is the outcome, then you can invite people to have real conversations. And now the onus is on that person. Did you ask them what they need? How are you helping them to focus on what they can do? Now you've exposed the fact that they are not helping their people to be aware of why they're upset. It's always a fight about the destination. It's always a fight about the solution instead of saying, what do you need right now? Solution isn't up for discussion. Regardless of what we think of it, how can we do the most possible good in this moment for each other? And even if your manager, this is the beauty of this, even if your manager is completely out to lunch and a complete narcissist and can't be fixed, you can always ask yourself, what can I do? How can I reframe my own heart, my own mind, and focus on what you can do in the moment? And that's empowering no matter what role that you have.
Thank you very much for that. Nick, to you.
Yeah, it's there's a lot, that we've covered. We're coming to the end of time here a little bit. Something you said earlier about kind of that awareness of what might be impacting what employees are bringing to work. I know I had an experience where we were changing houses and the financing was going haywire, and I didn't even realize the impact that that was having on my professional life. And, had a leader been like, hey, this sounds really stressful. How can I help support you through this so that you can get this solved and still be here with us? And I think that ideal is what we're all trying to get to. And in so many of these conversations, we say leadership like it's a nonchalant thing, but leadership is a power position. It's an important position, and we hold leaders to a high standard. We want them to be the sort of people who support and do all this. And unfortunately, there's a lot of leadership out there. And I don't think it's people, the vaudeville villain twisting their mustache. They don't know, they've got old habits and all of this. And so to have kind of a framework where you stop and say, okay, I know what I have as an obligation to the organization. What are my obligations to my team? And I think trying to frame those questions is imperative. And everybody wants to be a leader because they want the prestige, but does everybody have the skills to do it? And how do you have those conversations kindly? And where are the natural born talents? Where are the skills that can be taught? And are we expecting it overnight or, in 6 months from now? So I think that just that general topic of leadership, saying it is a position of privilege, and that privilege comes with responsibilities both to the organization and the team, is something I just kind of wanted to highlight as we get to the end of the conversation.
Thank you very much for that, Nick. MaryJo, great to have you here. Wonderful conversation. Just before I turn it over back to Dr. Emmy, I want to put you on the spot a little bit.
Yeah.
We live in a world of chaotic change, especially in certain industries. I can't imagine being on a leadership team for a car manufacturer right now because change is coming so rapidly. Can you give us a grade on how they're doing? Or is there so much chaotic change happening daily that we can't even grade people right now? We have to wait and see the results.
I love that question, and I will be as brief as I can. I think that the biggest thing that I would have to say is, unless we're in the boardroom, we can't give a grade at this point. There's too much flying around. There's too much that's connected that we don't even see that's connected. But unless they're having these conversations that say, what is true no matter what is our ultimate need? What do we need to stay afloat and thrive, even if a lot of things have to go away? Then even if they financially are doing okay, I don't think they're doing okay, because human beings are the most important things. Human beings are the most important. And so if we're not leveraging every crisis and every chaotic situation to help each other become the highest and best version that we can, and that includes radical honesty and a commitment to be constructive. If we're not doing that, then everything else ultimately doesn't matter. So since we don't have access to the boardroom, I don't think that any of us can say from here how they're doing, but we will soon find out.
Yes,
and
we
that's
will.
true for all of us. I have loved this conversation so much. I wish we had 5 hours just to keep going. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I've loved having, and if you want to continue conversation, I welcome any further conversations.
Well, you're welcome to come back and join us anytime and share your voice with us. And Dr. Emmy, thank you very much for setting this up, and let's throw it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, again, Dr. Burchard, for joining us today, for your insights, and definitely encourage those who are here or who are listening in the future to this podcast to connect with Dr. Burchard, follow her work, and just keep that conversation going. I think there's so much to be said for the different kinds of change, right? It's such a broad word, and we have this change umbrella, and we do have to remember that there are many pillars of change and types of change that exist within this very broad umbrella term that we use in the organizational landscape. So I appreciate your contributions and all the questions and comments that came along with this. This was very insightful to me as well, and even validating in some ways, I'll say that. And so thank you so much for that. Next week, we're going to actually be talking about a very related concept, which is integrity in leadership and trust in leadership as well. So for those who are here and those who are listening, trust and integrity in leadership is going to be part of that conversation, which I think very neatly just rolls into the next week. And the topic of conversation, and as Nick mentioned, the true responsibility of leaders who oftentimes are even just thrown into that role, right? What does that actually mean to have integrity in that role, to build trust, and how to be a trustworthy leader is going to be next week.
Sounds good. And thank you everyone for sharing your voice today. And if you're enjoying the Work Cookie podcast, we are live Thursdays at 12 Eastern. Just go to the CBOC website and you get your free invitation. Join us and share your voice as well. And with that, it was great to see everyone once again, and we'll see everyone back here in 1 week's time. Dr. Emmy, if you want to count us out.
I sure will. 3, 2, and 1.